and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast, episode 89, with me, John Loxley. Hope you're doing well out there. Today, my guest is my friend Charlie. He's been on the podcast a number of times in the past. Absolutely love talking with Charlie, and I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed talking with him. How's things?
Yeah, I mean, personally, very challenging. Lot of growth, optimism of where I'm heading personally, realism as to where I think we're sort of heading in the aggregate, and yeah, so no complaints, but life is tough, you know. Life is
Life is suffering, said the Buddha to your right.
He did. I think he had a point. The whole rascal. He was onto something, wasn't
he? I think he may have been.
Yeah, man.
So, why? What's been tough? What are you struggling with?
It is for the first time in my life, probably in the period since we last spoke, roughly speaking, it had its genesis, taking the initiative and attempting to consciously co-create my life rather than merely being a slave to mechanical forces. And most of the time, I probably am still a slave to mechanical forces. You know, like the samsara that the Buddha spoke about. The endless cycle that beings are just swept up in and are, to use the AA terminology, powerless against, to attempt to grasp some initiative and to generate aspects of my life through will with a capital W. And like, I kind of been trained in AA or misunderstood the doctrine, which is also possible, maybe even probable, to distrust the idea of personal will. And I've come to see that, in my opinion, as a mistake. And this is terrifying, what I'm trying to do here, and very difficult because it requires surmounting an entire lifetime of habit, but also awe-inspiring as well. You know, to kind of appreciate that I'm a tiny, humble creature in a fucking endless universe, alone to a certain extent, certainly in this place where we're physically separated from each other, and yet have the call to adventure, to find out what is going on and how I can participate in it. So it's the most terrifying and exciting period of my life, John.
So, in practical terms, what does that mean? Like, what is it that's terrifying you, and what is it like when you say you're getting swept up in the kind of, you know, in the mechanism of life? Like, how is that manifesting itself in your life?
I'll use a simple practical example that is relevant in my daily life. It would be my work life, my business life, which I thought I had some agency over. But on reflection, if I look at how it has unfolded over the 20 odd years that I've been involved in my profession, it hasn't. I've just blindly reacted to the things that have been happening around me, and as a result of that, more through luck than judgment, ended up involved in a business, although I wouldn't say running it, which then fell apart at the beginning of last year, broadly speaking. And over the last year or so, partly through becoming close to a guy that I trained with 20 years ago, who has carved out his own little niche, and learning from him the value of conscious daily work. I've put a plan together, a kind of a vision of what I want from my business, and have set about implementing it. And to be doing that consciously is a catalyst for tremendous fear for me, John, because I don't think I've consciously created anything in my entire life, and uh, it's in stark contrast to what was happening before, where it was just a daily series of reactions which brought me to where it brought me. Whereas now I've set out a plan. Okay, what do I want to do? I want to employ people that have a similar mindset to me, that want sovereignty and to be resilient in the current economic climate, and have them and provide them with a working environment that isn't a bums on seats 9 to 5 arrangement that demands personal responsibility without me needing to know where they are on a daily basis, save to the extent that I issue them tasks and they implement them. And they're not based in any particular office. Their only remit is to meet our clients' needs with the visits to sites that are necessary to meet those needs. And it's slowly developing, and I'm watching it emerge before my eyes. And as I say, I was sat down not long before we started speaking, John, just putting together a kind of a handover package for a guy that's starting with me on Monday. Very experienced guy, that expensive as well, and getting him going. And he lives up in he lives in Lancashire, and traditionally in my profession, you must be a bum on a seat. So I'm also doing it differently to how everyone else does it as well, which is scary in and of itself. So that's about a kind of a simple example, and also committing to that work environment, John, which I wanted to walk away from because I convinced myself that it was toxic, which it is. It was corrupt, which it is. It was adversarial, which it is. Ergo, as a quote unquote spiritual man, it's not for me. And what I've realized is actually that environment is perfect for work on myself, because in order to maintain, to use an AA phrase, serenity, if you like, stability, and an ability to respond rather than react in the face of that daily melee, is very difficult work and requires meticulous self-observation at all times to try to be in a position to respond to what's going on rather than blindly reacting as a result of my conditioned tendencies, old traumas, fucking, habit patterns of my blah, blah, blah. And it's actually an excellent environment for that, albeit it's very unpleasant. And that's the other a change, I suppose, from recent times is to stop my tendency to seek out the pleasant and avoid the uncomfortable. In essence, it is as simple as that, I guess, John, because it's by switching that paradigm around that I might overcome the mechanical behavior that leads to the incessant seeking out of pleasant, comfortable situations. And I think all creatures do it, man. Like, there's a guy called, you probably know him, P.D. Uspensky, who wrote In Search of the Miraculous, amongst other books, who uses a snail as his what would you say, metaphor, I guess, who moves slowly towards the pleasant and away from the other pleasant in a straight line. And he proposes you can extrapolate from that simple example to all creatures in our world, that to a certain extent we all proceed in that kind of straight line, moving away from the unpleasant and towards the pleasant. And I've used everything that I have become interested in life to pursue unconsciously the goal of finding the pleasant, including recovery, including meetings, including spirituality, including meditation, the lot. And I'm not really transforming anything in a meaningful way internally. It's just a more sophisticated way of pursuing the same goals I always pursued, even when drinking.
Comfort.
Avoid the unpleasant, seek the pleasant. You know.
Yeah. Comfort. Yeah. It's interesting. Who do you work for? The police.
If you look at my Facebook profile statuses, John, I think it'll be fairly plain that I'm not working for our friends in blue.
Just describe the environment perfectly. But interesting though, what you're talking about, the will initially.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because obviously I've picked exactly the right moment to have this conversation with you, because I've just been away on holiday and I was thinking a lot about very similar things, all the things that I do that aren't really, benefiting my kind of spiritual, for want of a better word, growth, and all the things that I do to avoid the growth, and all the things that I do to basically I was thinking about all the things that I force my will into, that happened because of my will.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how we're kind of taught in recovery that you got to align your will with God's will, whatever that may be.
Indeed.
I think that whatever that is the thing that you're doing when you don't feel uncomfortable. So once you get into doing the thing that is God's will for you, whatever God is, it's the thing where, the flow state, kind of, once you get into that, whatever that is that kind of allows you to experience that state, for me, that must be what that is aiming at, I think. And it's actually, and as I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about all the things that I do in my life, I was thinking that the vast majority of things don't put me in that state. And to actually follow the things that do put me in that state is going to be a journey in itself, because I've got to find that, I've got to kind of like refine those things again. So I've found myself in a position where I've been like really questioning my work environment and the things that I do as hobbies. Even this podcast, like I've made a decision. I think I spoke to you last time, I was just ending it for a while, and I started it up again. And I'm like, I've come to the end again now. My 100th episode, which will be in 2 episodes' time, will be my last episode. Could be the last episode for good. I don't know. We'll see. But it was just another one of those things where I was like, I'm kind of forcing this now. It's not. I'm not getting from it what I used to get from it. So yeah. So I'm in a kind of similar place to you, I think.
On that, I mean, on the subject of will and aligning it with God's will, I've read some interesting material recently which proposes, and I think it can be observed, that there are, let's say that the terminology they use to describe the creative activity of God, for want of a better turn of phrase, is the ray of creation, and they propose that it's comprised of a descending octaves and ascending octaves, i.e. The entropic forces that cause order to fall apart and become disorder, and the converse for the creative forces. And these same sources propose that in this time and this place, it is under the sway of the entropic forces predominantly for the vast majority of creatures here, which is not a bad thing, because as we've spoke about before, you need both poles, don't you, to produce the whole. The difficulty that I had accepting that particular proposal was that, in principle, that means that when I feel comfortable and in a flow state and locked in to the natural order here, then on some level I'm actually in the downward spiral and not the upward spiral, because of the nature of this place. And I think if you look at the bigger socio-economic and political picture and the way things are visibly falling apart, regardless of what your perspective is on the topics that have our attention at the moment, the pattern is entropic for sure. Things are falling apart.
Is that, do you mean when you say this time and this place, do you just mean now as in this time period, or do you mean when this place, do you mean it's all is an entropy?
What they say is fucking planet Earth, period. Like, the physical domain we're in is, as human beings, it is governed by primarily the laws of entropy.
Well, that kind of goes back to the Buddhist saying, doesn't it? Like, life is suffering. I mean, I the reason why I asked the question is because that's what I'm kind of starting to think, is that this is it. Like, it's always an entropy.
Yeah, well, quite. However, the thing that distinguishes this material from, say, the Buddhist teachings or indeed AA's teachings, which with its powerlessness concept, I think is pointing at the same thing, isn't it? Albeit in different language, is that you can escape what they call the general law, what the Buddha would have called samsara, and what AA would call powerlessness, and actually and get yourself under the law of exceptions rather than the general law, and evolve using the very forces that are driving the entropic tendencies of this environment, and the pain and the difficulty they cause, as a furnace, I guess, in which you can crystallize something permanent, a permanent sense of self, if you like, use self with a capital S, and actually go in the opposite direction, which is why I've taken the actions I've been taking recently in regards to doing more or less the opposite of what I've had a tendency to do, which is to seek out the pleasant, even to the extent that the pleasant is a flow state, which has a very different flavour to it, to say pleasure from eating something nice, doesn't it? It's when you're really resonating with the environment you're in and everything feels right. But I find their logic irresistible. This particular set of teachings, and observable, and that's important, John. And I learned that from talking to you in a couple of these podcasts, and the aforementioned guy that I've been working with is to dispense with my tendency to think in the abstracts all the time and preoccupy myself with the abstracts, and look at sort of flesh and blood reality a little bit more, man.
Well, I mean, what you're saying basically is actually the AA teaching, which is face the fear and do it anyway, isn't it? Really?
I guess it is, John.
I mean, in a way, it's like, and I suppose, you hear these adages that all make total sense, like you're exactly where you need to be in this present moment. You're always in the place. If you can look at life consistently as lessons, teachings, and every relationship that you're in is the relationship that you need to be in that particular moment to learn whatever lessons you need to learn. Yeah. The job that you're in is the job that you need to be in to learn those lessons, and so on and so forth. And like, I do really resonate with what you're saying, and it is making that, like, it. you saying exactly what you just said there has really kind of confirmed what I've been thinking, especially about my own job, which is, I've found recently that I'm in a position with my job where I've been doing it for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I can do it blindfolded, standing on my head. You know what I mean? And I felt like I need a new challenge, and then all of a sudden, a new challenge came because we got our team expanded massively by about 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
Our co-team leader that I'm now working with, I've got a new manager. It was loads of change, and my initial reaction to it was, I need to get a new job. And actually, what I've realised through going away and then coming back is I don't need a new job at all. I'm perfectly in the place where I need to be right now to learn what I need to learn.
Yeah.
On all the things like patience, tolerance, like being more kind and loving and yeah, well, patience is the main one, like having the time for people, like all that stuff like that I'm terrible at naturally. It's all there in front of me if I want it. And if I don't want it, what'll happen is I'll walk away from it, and then the next job I get will be exactly the same. Be no different.
Very true. There's I don't know if you've been maybe reading the same material, but just kind of dialed into the same stuff. There's a fantastic researcher and writer called Laura Knight Jadzik. The second half of her surname is from her Polish husband's. I can't pronounce it. So she says, all there is lessons. This is one infinite school. And that's the most terrifying thing I've ever heard, and the most inspiring, because it means I'm never going to stop suffering on some level. Do you know what I mean? But conversely, what I can learn and experience and grow into is limitless. And when I sit with that and hearing you say it again, there, it's like, fuck, man, that is a scary proposal.
I think though that you can transcend it, and the way that you transcend it is by not fighting it. It's like, I'll give you the perfect example. So ever since I put the drink down, I've had a series of different addictions, and every single one of those addictions has never been as bad as the alcohol, but it's caused me pain in some way, and I've had to face it. And once I've eventually said, right, I'm going to face this, I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah.
The same effect happened as what happened with the alcohol, was that I got that relief. It left me, the obsession for whatever that thing was, it left me. Now, the one thing that I've battled with for years and years that I cannot let go, like recently I've let go of caffeine, right? So I've drank caffeine for years, and then I went on to decaf when I came into recovery, and I just couldn't let that little bit of decaf go, and it's like, it's only a decaf, like what's the fucking problem? And the more I researched it, there's like, I don't know, something like 30% caffeine in a decaf, which shouldn't really make a massive deal to anybody. But personally, to me, caffeine makes me feel like shit. Like even the tiniest bit makes me feel like I'm on speed, and the withdrawal from it when I stop drinking it's terrible, even off decaf. So anyway, long story short, I made the decision about 4 weeks ago. I'm done with it. Like, I am actually like, fuck caffeine. I'm not drinking it anymore. And you know what? I feel fantastic as a result of not drinking it. Now, I cannot get to that place with sugar. So I have this constant battle of like, right, I'm going to swear off it. And then, 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, whatever, I go back to have an ice cream. And before you know it, I'm having 4 ice creams a day. And I'm fucking like, mad as a hatter with it again. And the reason why I'm making comparing the two is because the relief from just facing it and just letting go of it, I believe personally, and this is just for me as the person I am and the addict that I am, I believe that if I was able to get to the place where I can actually, look at every one of those kind of, obsessions, defects, whatever, and especially the ones that put me in the flow state, because they do, some of them, like music's one for me. I love writing music. I create music. And when I'm doing that, I'm fucking addicted. You know what I mean? I'm in it.
Yeah.
Everybody else I've got no interest in anything else that's going on around me. I'm totally focused on that thing. That's a flow state. That's an addiction. I believe that if I could actually say to myself, you know what, I'm not doing any of those things anymore. I'm done with it. And all I'm going to do is face all the things that I don't want to do.
Fuck
I
yeah.
believe that's when you get that crystallization of the self, and you would transcend
Mm,
all the shit, because
yeah.
you're saying no to it, aren't you? You're saying no to the things that you want, but the things that you know aren't good for you.
That's powerful stuff, man. So another way, of conceptualizing addiction is it's all the stuff that keeps us asleep, really.
Yeah.
Everything that keeps me asleep in the way, even when I'm awake, and fucking out and avoiding working through the things I need to work through. That's very, very powerful way of putting it,
Well,
man.
if you made a list of the things that, like, if I sat here and I made a list of I don't know, the 10 or 20 things that I do on any given week that distract me from A, feeling my feelings, and B, facing those feelings and facing the things that I need to face in order to transcend, so to speak.
Yep.
It'd be an easy list to write,
Yeah.
but it'd be a difficult undertaking to stop doing those things.
Yeah, man. I think another way of putting this for me is that I've actually started over the last year to work steps 6 and 7. It says this is what separates the men from the boys, done it in the 12. But I'm paraphrasing slightly there.
Yeah.
But I've gotten to grips with the truthfulness of that proposal, because it is long, slow, painstaking, difficult, unglamorous work, isn't it? Really. There
Massively.
ain't, no one's going to give you a pat on the back for it on a daily basis, and I'm unlikely to produce a fucking really pleasurable or pleasant state on a daily basis with it, unless or until it's actually worked through, and then there's the satisfaction of constructive work, isn't there? And you get that little bit freer, as you were saying there. So yeah, man, maybe it is as simple as, John, I started to work step 6 and 7 after last time we spoke,
Well,
and I hadn't started before.
It's got a really dirty word attached to it, step 6 and 7, and beginning with H, and that is humility. And everybody hates that word because, you say, I'm a humble person, then you're obviously not humble, are you? And you're trying to be like, when you work in step 6 and 7, you're constantly, looking at those things that cause you the pain, attempting to do the opposite, and in attempting to do the opposite, you're trying to humble yourself and be a bit more humble, and it's really bloody hard. I mean, I just in the pandemic, I joined Emotions Anonymous. So basically, my partner had some issues. Long story short, she ended up looking for a fellowship herself for some help. She's not an alcoholic, she's not an addict, and she found a 12-step fellowship called Emotions Anonymous. And I happened to be overhearing some of the conversations that were going on in these meetings. I was like walking through the kitchen and I could hear like shares and stuff. And I thought, God, that sounds like really powerful stuff. Anyway, she said, why do you fancy kind of joining these meetings? So I was like, yeah, cool. If you're cool with it. So anyway, started going to these meetings, and it was just like completely revelatory. I got a sponsor. I went through I've been through the steps, like went through them really quick. And I did a new step 4 and 5. And the way that we did, have you heard of the Clarence Snyder way of doing the steps? It's basically Dr. Bob's lineage was Dr. Bob, Clarence Snyder, and then all his kind of like disciples, so to speak. And Clarence Snyder way of doing it is you do it over a weekend on a retreat. So the full 12 steps. So basically, my sponsor had done it that way. And I did it with him, but I didn't do it over like 2 days. I did it over a couple of weeks. But it was the 4 and the 5 was done over 2 days. So I wrote it on the 4 on the first day, shared it on the second day, and it wasn't anything. I didn't do it like it's done in the book. It was the whole point of it was about looking at your defects of character and looking at what the opposite of your defect of character is, and how can you get from one to the other. So resentment, for example, the opposite of resentment is contentment. So every time I've got a resentment, what I need to be thinking to myself is, how can I get from here to contentment?
Yeah.
And what's the process I need to follow? And you know what? It was like completely revelatory, but it's hard. It's like really, really hard.
It requires work, doesn't it, to get from A to B? Every single time is going to require work, isn't it?
So, yeah, and and the work is internal. The work
Yeah.
is like you're battling, and that is, back to the whole self-will stuff. Essentially, like, what is God's will for me? Well, God's will for me is the opposite of that defect. Really, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
All the work has to be, it's like, what can I do to get from resentment to contentment? Well, I can pray. I can ring somebody and speak to them on the phone, and that's a good way of kind of getting it out there.
Yeah.
I can write it down. It's like thinking about these processes. It's a lot of work. Like, if you just want to mosey on through life and not do this work, it's so much easier.
Indeed. Have you heard Jordan Peterson talk about resentment at all?
Yes. Yeah.
He's good on resentment, isn't he?
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing slightly here. He says you can learn a lot from resentment, and usually it's one of two things. You're either being a bloody baby and need to grow up, or there's a tyrant in your life that you need to take action in relation to, which might mean confronting the situation and correcting it and establishing a boundary, or it might mean you need a new job.
Yeah.
And I've that has slightly adjusted my perspective on resentment. It's never a good emotion to be carrying around with me, but it's the same thing, John, because I want to get to the pleasant emotional state as quickly as possible, to take some sort of traditional inventory, which enables me to identify a defect of character and pray and get rid of the resentment. So to get rid of the resentment and get a pleasant feeling.
Contentment, yeah.
Means that for many years, not once with my resentments did I use them, or very rarely, as a basis of identifying something concrete in my life that I needed to change, that might involve difficult and unpleasant work. Be that, as I say, dealing with a tyrant at work, dealing with a tyrant in a relationship, and what have you, which is, that really goes against the grain with me.
Yeah.
The capacity to say no. By golly, I have found that word difficult to say over the years, and it's something that I've made great strides in over the last year. I get it wrong quite a lot. Sometimes I say no when I should say yes, and sometimes I say yes when I should say no. But the willingness to say no is there now, at least, and I can determine when I need to say no sometimes by examining a resentment. And actually, like you said, by dealing with that situation, the end result will be contentment.
Yeah.
It requires me doing hard and work that I don't want to do, that is in contrary to what I've tended to do in those situations, which is to look for the easy fix, and misusing tools I've been given in AA to escape the feeling. Do you know what I mean?
Well, really what we are actually talking about is essentially just growing up, really. Like, it's just having the ability. I mean, I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind when it comes to recovery and life in general is that you're supposed to be taught, when you're a baby, you're supposed to be taught how to express your negative feelings in a healthy kind of way, feel them, process them, and then move on. But us in recovery, we didn't get that. So we're now learning a process of doing that. Now, I believe that if you were a kind of healthy and inverted commas human being, we wouldn't need to write it down, phone a friend, pray in order to overcome that resentment. A healthy human being can take that resentment, take a step back from it objectively, have a look at it, see what their part in it is. And if they owe the other person an apology, they will say, look, I'm really sorry about that, and that'll be it, done. Or they'll say to the person, you were out of order, don't speak to me like that again, or don't, whatever, put a boundary in place, and then they'll move on as well. That's a healthy way of living your life, and there's like plenty of people out there that can do that. We just really can't do that. Well, I can't do that.
No.
But I am learning how to do that now. Like, where I am now compared to where I was 10 years ago before I started this recovery journey, it's light years away from it. And now I've got a daughter who, 17 months old now, and she's like, she's just moving into the tantrum phase.
Mm.
And I'm realizing and recognizing that, like she was having, when we were away on holiday, she was having tantrums, and I was trying to soothe her so that she wouldn't tantrum. And my partner was like, nah, just let her have a tantrum. She needs to get it out.
Yeah.
She needs to understand that behavior doesn't wash, but also that's how she's feeling right now. So don't try and change the way that she feels. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh my God, I'm trying to change the way she feels.
Yeah.
Because all I know is changing the way I feel. Like I don't want to feel that way, so I'll just like have an ice cream. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to feel resentful. Yeah. I don't want to feel jealous. I don't want to feel angry. I'll have an ice cream. Simple, finished.
Yeah.
But that feeling never goes away, does it?
Fades maybe very, very slowly. I don't know, but very, very slowly. I am, like you said, there's big improvement over the last 7 years. And funnily that you should mention the food stuffs and all the rest of it, because I've kind of I've fairly radically changed my diet over the last, I don't know, about 6 weeks or something like that. I've dispensed with sugar, carbs, grains, and dairy, which was really, really difficult for the first couple of weeks, but I'm kind of habituated to it now. And there are various reasons for me doing that, but all of those foodstuffs they are sources of tremendous comfort for me, So I'm doing like, they call it the paleo diet, but what it does, it deprives me. The way it works for me emotionally is it deprives me of the foodstuffs that I seek comfort in.
Yeah.
Okay, there's physiological benefits as well, apparently. I'm not a scientist though, John, so I can only read the data and formulate rough conclusions about it. But the way it helps me is depriving me of the sources of comfort, because for listening to you talk about sugar there, for me, I'll get that same satisfaction from cheese, or do you know what I mean? I'll get myself a whole lump of cheese from the supermarket, good quality stuff, and I'll just have a slice of that, another slice, and then I eat a whole lump of cheese in a single sitting, and I feel sick afterwards, man.
Yeah.
So it's got nothing. There's nothing healthy about that for me, man. So I've removed those foodstuffs from my diet.
And how have you found it though? I mean, because like that sounds like fucking brilliant. But how?
Honestly, the extraordinary thing, and this was the promise with giving a diet a go, is the clarity of thinking that is produced. These guys would propose, and I'm not suggesting that they're absolutely right and there isn't contrary information out there, because they might not be, and there is, but that they're poisonous to the human body, and can kind of leave you with brain fog. And my clarity of thinking recently has been sharper than it's ever been, John. It really is. And that's given me the ability to communicate things that I used to use complicated language for in simpler terms. That's one change that I've noticed. My energy levels are higher. My will is stronger, and I've also been using iodine drops to detox from heavy metal poisoning and fluoride poisoning. Again, I know these are controversial subjects, John, and very much in the arguably tinfoil hat territory, but it's a scientific fact that you can check that fluoride calcifies the glands, specifically the pineal and pituitary, And it's also a scientific fact that iodine is very, very effective at reversing that process. And those two glands are apparently essential for any sort of higher order thinking. And I'm at a relatively early stage of the process. I mean, this is something that I need to sustain for a year, 2 years, John, if I'm really if it's gonna produce the fruit that it might. But the early signs are extremely encouraging. And I seem to have a greater what's the word? I'm more capable of resisting my primal urges that have been causing me fucking problems as well. Maybe because the thinking's sharper and it can overcome the emotional states that would precede certain behaviours. Do you know what I mean? So the thinking is running the show rather than the feelings.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And again, I don't know if I've misunderstood AA or the teachings in AA, but I come to distrust my own thinking with good reason, actually, because a lot of it is rubbish. A lot of it's foggy, clouded, unclear, etc. And most of it was emotional thinking, and therefore should be distrusted. But the sort of thinking that I've been capable of recently is responsible for me making decisions moment to moment that are better than the ones I was making previously. And it has to be I think it's part of a package. It's not just the diet. It's not just the efforts towards the things we've discussed already in terms of facing my difficulties and walking towards them and through them. It's the whole package, and not seeking relief from the discomfort that I am experiencing moment to moment in whatever shape or form through some sort of reliance on some external agency. And again, like I run into difficulties because of what I've learned in AA, that self-reliance is to be distrusted. And I'm not sure about these things anymore, John. I can't dismiss self-reliance as a bad thing, providing the self that seeks to rely on itself is in reasonably good working order. When it's obvious, when I rocked up in AA, I could not rely on myself because the whole organism was a mess. The thinking was a mess. The emotions were a mess. I was physically dependent on alcohol and cocaine at the very least, and probably other stuff as well. And so, of course, I couldn't rely on myself at all. There was no basis for such a reliance. But my thoughts are now that a kind of a gradual decoupling from reliance upon person X, person Y, entity Z, and trusting myself would be a healthy thing to aspire towards, rightly or wrongly. I might be wrong, John, but it's kind of these are my reflections over the last year or so. And actually, I think you did a podcast, didn't you, with a couple of people that had suggested it was possible to live sober with the package of difficulties addicts and alcoholics have, without necessarily relying exclusively upon AA and its ancillary organisations, and I found that quite encouraging. Do you know what I mean?
Well, a lot of the people that I've spoken to over the years have not all of them have been in AA. I don't think my opinion on what you just shared there is, firstly, I don't think that everything that is shared in AA or that's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is necessarily bang on. I think that the majority of it is, but there's lots of things. How many years on are we? When was the book written? 70 years ago, 80 years ago. We're 80 years on from when that book was written, and there's a lot of information out there that contradicts some of the stuff in the book. And when it comes to reliance on the self versus reliance on, God or higher power or whatever, it also says in the book, and this is the line of thinking that I've gone down over the years and where I'm at today, and maybe this will change, but for me, whatever God is everything. God is deep down within every man, woman, and child. Like your essence, like, you know, the Atman and the Brahman. You know, whatever God is us. So
Yeah.
if you can't rely on that internal guidance system, then you are relying on external things. And I think that when you first reach recovery, you can't rely, like you can't get in touch with that internal guidance system. So therefore, all you're relying on is your senses, and your senses lie like fuck.
Yes.
Plus all your cravings, you know, and everything that's your emotions, your mental health, your physical body. You can't, like you said, the organism is fucked, and you can't rely on it. But as you know, you would hope that by 5, 6, 7, 8, definitely 10, certainly by 15, 20 years sober, that you would be in touch with that internal guidance system, that essence, that spirit, and you've done enough work and continue to do enough work that all those senses and habitual thought patterns and emotions that you hadn't dealt with, they're all kind of like in the rear view mirror, you know, and you live in a life which it sounds like where you're coming to now, and I think where I'm at as well, is where you live in a life that's primarily based on, let's call it God consciousness. You know, you're just conscious of your internal guidance system. You're conscious of your intuition. You're conscious of the fact that you're connected to the universe, and that actually you are in a classroom. Like, everything that happens and everything that's going on around you is lessons to learn in order for you to progress and to get an ever progressing level of serenity as well, should you choose that path. And if you don't choose that path and you choose the opposite road, you get more pain, you get more suffering. You can always go back to the absolute living hell that you were in 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's the way kind of I look at it. And I think that, you know, I think one of the things that you should have confidence in, and that I definitely have confidence in now, you know, and especially after doing this podcast and talking to all these people who've got different views and stuff, is I've got absolute confidence that the most important thing in the world is how I am in the world. You know, like, how am I in the world today? Because I'm the person I've got to live with me, and everybody else around me's got to live with me as well. So if I don't want to go to AA meetings anymore and I want to do things differently, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's fine, you know, but I might want to go back to AA. It's like I said to you before about the EA meetings. I've done the EA meetings for the last few months. I actually found that, although I was really enjoying it, I was like, this is kind of like Adele's thing, you know, this is like her thing, and I feel a little bit like I'm not really with my tribe. My tribe are over there, and I've kind of like been ignoring them a little bit, and I'm going to go back to my tribe, and I've started going back to those meetings again. And that's working for me at the moment. But if you'd have asked me 3 months ago, I'd have been like, no, I'm definitely doing these meetings. You know, so it just changes, doesn't it? But what I do is, when I start to get to a place where I start to feel a bit uncomfortable, and I'm like, you know what, something needs to change a little bit here. It's at that point then that I start to really, really trust what's going on inside. And that's where I get it. You know, I think that deep down within me, I've got everything that I need in order to tell me what is the right path and what is the right direction to be going. So I don't know whether that answers what you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, it's that's why these conversations are good to have. It kind of it endorses my thinking around certain issues that I'm not entirely confident on because of I suppose because of my track record, really, John. I don't have if I'm ruthlessly self-honest, I don't have a track record that suggests relying on myself is a good idea.
But do you know something?
But I'm getting there, mate. I'm getting there. If I look around me now, John, if I look at my immediate environment, right, you know, that sort of that maxim as above, so below. Yeah. I live in a beautiful, beautiful apartment overlooking the ocean on Brighton Marina. I've got quite an exciting little business going. I've got a beautiful son, albeit I'm estranged from his mother, but that's another story. I've got a good circle of friends, and I work consciously every day to improve and progress. So yeah, I'm doing pretty well, but it's, that's a relatively small snapshot in my life as a whole. My life as a whole was it was a mess, man. It was a mess. I kind of blundered my way from one disaster to another, including in recovery. Truth be told, and it was the mechanical behaviour that I was talking about earlier on. If I'm looking for a basis upon which to forgive myself for my behaviour, I was asleep, man. I didn't know what I didn't know what I was, and I mean that literally. There wasn't hardly a conscious decision made at any point. It was just reaction, and I ended up where I ended up. So yes, and that track record is the cause for self-doubt right now. In spite of what the evidence suggests, that I don't need the self-doubt to the extent that I have during the first 7-8 years of recovery. That self-doubt, that fear, probably kept me safe, John, and on the narrow path. It was useful to a certain extent. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the one thing I just wanted to jump in. Sorry, I did nearly interrupt you, but it was just on the forefront of my mind because you're talking about the self-doubt. I think the one thing that mitigates self-doubt is acceptance. If you can, I've been talking about this a lot recently, and so. Two things that I've had to accept recently is, one, I'm getting thin on top, so I decided to shave my head because I was looking in photographs and looking in the mirror and seeing, my hair's going a bit thin at the back. My partner was saying to me, "Oh, it's not a problem," but I'm seeing it and I'm like, I don't like it, so I shaved my head, and I've had my head shaved for years before, so it's not an issue. And then the other thing is putting on weight. I've got to, I'm 41 this year. I can't eat the foods that I used to eat without. I used to be able to eat anything and not put any weight on, and now I've got to a place where the metabolism's obviously slowing down a little bit. I'm starting to get a bit of the old middle-age spread. And just before I went on holiday, I was like sat in my bedroom trying on my clothes for my holiday, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm actually turning into like a fat, bald old man, and it was like this moment of like, it was almost verging on despair.
Yeah.
Because I was like, shit, like I'm really like, it's actually happening, like that fear of like what's going to happen to you as you get older is like started to happen. But I was on holiday and I first thing that I was doing was, initially I was looking around and comparing myself to everybody else and thinking, well, there's loads of people that are more bald than I am, and there's loads of people that are bigger than I am as well, so that's not an issue. And then once I'd got past the comparing stage, I was like, do you know what? Like, it's all right. Like, the thing about acceptance is you've got to accept yourself for who you are in this moment right now for two reasons. One, because if you don't, you'll feel really shit about yourself. And two, if you don't actually accept who you are, then you can't change it, can you?
Yeah, that's very, very true. I felt when you started that sentence there, I knew what you were going to say. Not that I had preempted it, but I was really dialed into what you were saying there. It's very true. Yeah, without self-acceptance, there can be no change.
No. And this is, I think. Sorry, go on.
You're blinding yourself to it.
Well, you are, and then if you're blinding yourself to it, you start lying to yourself as well, don't you? Like, I can look in a mirror and I can kind of suck my stomach in and pretend that I've got a six pack and go, yeah, it's all right. Do you know what I mean? I still look like I do on that picture from 2017 where I actually had like a six pack, you know what I mean? And it's not true. It's like that is not going to get me anywhere. The fact of the matter is, like, until I really, really admit to myself that, like you said before, sugar is a toxic poison that actually gives you brain fog. It gives me brain fog. It gives me the sweats if I eat too much of it. It gives me headaches. The withdrawal from it's absolutely horrendous. I mean, why would I want to put something in my body that does that to me? Yeah, I can't tell you that I won't walk out from this podcast and have an ice cream later on, or a bar of chocolate. Like, that is how addicted my body is to that substance, in the same way that my body was addicted to alcohol, and I just couldn't stop it. So, you know, with all the best will in the world, and my willpower is very, very strong when it comes to certain things, one of the things that I do kind of have I wouldn't say it's a deep-seated belief, because again, I just don't know really what this means, but for some reason it'll happen when it happens.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. Do you know what I mean? Like, when we talk about agency and like will, like, I can't tell you that is going to end today or
When
tomorrow.
that lady I mentioned earlier, Laura Knight Jadwick, the way she put it, it will end once you or I have learned the lesson that needs to be learned.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Whatever that is, whatever that looks like, whatever despairing state you or I need to get into in relation to whatever defective behaviour we're manifesting, until that despairing state appears and the lesson at that point is learned, that the change cannot follow. I certainly see that in intimate relationships for me, John. That's the daddy of my issues, in that I get into the same patterns over and over again because I'm not learning the lessons. And I don't, like you said, I don't know precisely what they are or how long they'll take to resolve.
Yeah, I did that with relationships for many years until I met my current partner. And, well, I say until I met my current partner. When I met my current partner, it got worse, because all the lessons, like, I am actually learning the lessons, and the lessons are really fucking difficult and horrendous at times. You know, we've split up once, we've come close to splitting up on numerous occasions because of these lessons. And I don't know why. I don't know. This is the bit that I struggle with. Is like, I don't know why we have to go through so much pain to learn the lessons. That's the bit that baffles me, because it's plainly fucking obvious that, as an example, if I just talk to my partner kindly and lovingly at all times, and treated her with the same respect that I treat a work colleague, for example, like, I'd never speak to a work colleague the way that I speak to my partner sometimes, and vice versa, then we'd live harmoniously at all times. But for some reason, I think it's okay to be a complete dick and just speak to her like she's some, you know, person that I've got no feelings for whatsoever, and the same goes for her to me. And it's just bizarre. You know, why is it that it takes so much pain to learn these lessons? And I don't know why that is. Like, I don't know. Is everybody in the world going through the same, you know, having to learn the same lessons? Or is it just that in this physical manifestation, in our physical manifestation as alcoholics / addicts that are in recovery, that these are the lessons that we have to learn?
My take on it is, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's peculiar to alcoholics and or addicts, although we do commonly fall into the category of person that I'll describe. It's those that, for whatever reason, come out, they wake up from the exclusively mechanical behavior and begin a life lived consciously.
Yeah.
And once you do that, it becomes painful. Whereas I'll use a television program springs to mind, like Desperate Housewives. There's nothing conscious about what's going on in any of those dynamics. It's just mechanical patterns of behaviour repeating themselves over and over again. There isn't a desire, as far as I can see, to learn from them, to grow, to progress.
Yeah.
It's just a mechanical drive for more of whatever it is they want, or less of whatever it is they don't want.
Yeah.
Whereas we as alcoholics, who often fall into that category, and others that, for whatever reason, I don't know why, suddenly gain the ability to live consciously. And by consciously, I don't mean like separating your your rubbish into recycling and blocks and shit, but to notice what's going on within yourself in relation to your external environment, moment to moment, we find that capacity, and it's painful, isn't it?
Well,
It just
nobody becomes conscious until they hit rock bottom. So, the Buddha had to hit rock bottom. Eckhart Tolle, Eckhart Tolle.
He lived in a palace, man. He had a menagerie of servants. All the beautiful women he wanted at his disposal. He'd never been exposed to any of the ugliness of the world, had he? No. His father had protected him from it, right?
Yeah. And then you imagine if that you'd been protected from that your whole life, and then you go out and you see it all. I mean, that in itself is just a rock bottom, isn't it? But then, you've got your Eckhart Tolle's, Richard Moss. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. All the spiritual teachers across the ages, they all hit some sort of rock bottom, and as a result of that, became conscious and then imparted their teachings on the rest of us. And not that we're anywhere near that kind of ilk, but we've had the same thing happen to us. Everybody that's in recovery has had the same opportunity to live a conscious life, haven't they? Yes. And I think the thing is that in today's day and age, the reason why recovery is diluted and people get lost along the way, and so many people relapse back into their addiction of choice, is because it has been watered down. It has been diluted. I mean, just doing it that Clarence Snyder way, for example, helped me to realise that what they were doing back then was totally different to the recovery that we're doing now. And we're just two of the lucky ones that have actually decided off our own backs that we're going to go down our own spiritual paths. Like, my first sponsor was an atheist. He had no interest in anything to do with the spiritual. So I ended up investigating it for myself, and, the rest is history. And ironically, he's now a Buddhist, so he's eventually gone down his own spiritual path. But you're the same. You read. I mean, funnily enough, when you said what have you been reading? I haven't read a book for over a year. I consciously decided that I wasn't going to read anything anymore, because I was like, I fucking know everything that these people need to tell me. I know it. And I don't mean that to sound arrogant, like I know everything, but what I meant is they're all teaching me the same fucking stuff. And it's actually the same stuff that I learned in recovery in the first place. So let's just put it into practice and see what happens. Yes. And putting it into practice, I've realised, you know what? It's fucking hard. Like, it's much easier to read the books.
John, man, totally. And I went through a long period of not reading any of that sort of material at all, and for similar reasons. And again, it was just seeking out the pleasant, man. Do you know what I mean? I could get lost in these emotional states which imitate spiritual experience, I think. And I've become very skillful, particularly with my meditation practice, at deliberately cultivating them. You can bring them into being, and they're very similar to the real thing, I think. And the real thing I have experienced very, very seldomly, because of the work it requires to get there. And so I stopped reading those kind of books, man, and got to work, I guess. But maybe as a result of doing that, I've come into material recently that is quite different from anything that I'd read before, and maybe that is a result of my willingness to actually put in the hard graft that is really called for, has on some sort of level enabled that information to be revealed to me. Do you know what I mean? I don't like to get too woo-woo, but I can't write it off as a coincidence.
Yeah.
So I totally get that, man. I really do. And once you've read one Osho book, you've read them all to a certain extent. Likewise, Eckhart Tolle. Likewise, all the Buddhist material. It's fantastic stuff, and I really, got a lot of value from it. But in the end, I was just consuming that material the same way that I consume a piece of cheese.
Yeah. Well, I think there's times to have a break from it, and then there's times to learn more, isn't there? And
yes.
And that's it. It's like, that's why I said, like, I don't know it all, and there's always new stuff to take on board. But I think similarly to, you know, like the relationships and the work, etc. It's like, okay, you've learned all this stuff now. Let's put it into practice. Let's learn the lesson.
Yes.
Graduate that level, and then we'll move on to the next lesson. You know.
It's also, I mean, I'm really, it's brilliant hearing you speak in this language, because it is so similar to the material I'm reading at the moment. It's uncanny, actually. It's uncanny. I won't use a stronger word than that, but yeah, you're talking about graduation and lesson learning and all that, and action being the most important thing.
Yeah. I think that for me personally, this podcast has been a platform for me to talk the talk. Like I know that what I'm talking about resonates with people, and I get enough comments from people listening to it that say, you know, thank you for explaining this in this way or whatever. But I now need a period of time to put everything that I've talked about and everything that I've read and, you know, all the kind of like good stuff that I know works for people and that I've written about myself into practice. Because, you know, I'll give you a perfect example, and I'm going to have to end on this actually because I need to make a move shortly. Is I stood on a car park a few weeks ago, and an old guy and his missus nearly ran over my partner, like not forcibly, but like beeped her out of the way kind of thing, and, you know, drove his car quite aggressively towards her and parked up in his spot. And we were stood having a conversation with one of my neighbours that we happened to bump into outside of the shop, and I lost it. This guy, like I was really quite aggressive and abusive towards this guy, and it was like really embarrassing for my partner, you know. And afterwards, it took a bit of a while for me to come down from the rage and to apologise for my behaviour. But I said to her afterwards, I said, I don't know where that came from. Like, I don't want to. That's not me. Like, I don't want to be that person. That person is the person that I was 10 years ago. You know, if you looked at me the wrong way, especially if I'd have had a drink, that is the type of behaviour you would have got. And I just thought to myself, bloody hell, you know, I've done all this work over these 10 years and I'm still capable of being like that just because this guy has caught me on the wrong day. And it just made me really realise, like, there's work to be done, you know. There is work to be done. And I think that a lot of that was to do with taking my eye off the ball over the last probably couple of years, not meditating as much, not really doing my inventory in as much detail as I could do, not consciously making the decision to be loving and kind, shirking work here and there. You know, there's loads of little elements of my life that I could improve and I could get better on, and they're just little basic things. So that's the decision I've made, is to just try to work on those things. So, you know, hopefully, like a bit further down the line, I'll actually be able to, you know, have another conversation like this and say, yeah, you know what, I've actually had quite a lot of serenity over the past however many months, years. I've not behaved like that for a long time. You know, I'm actually a kind and loving partner. You know, I don't lose my temper with my kids. You know, like all that kind of stuff. Like, that's what I'm striving for. Yeah. So
good stuff, man. Oh, mate, wicked catching up with you, John. Thoroughly
cool,
enjoyed.
Mate. Lovely to see you as always, and we'll catch up again at some point in the future.
We will, man. Take care, bro.
All right, mate. Take care. Thanks for listening, and if you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, please see a range of mutual aid organisations in the show notes. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.